afternoon, Your Excellencies, councillors, and representatives of government seated here today. I would first like to thank the Creator of the heavens and the earth for bestowing on Hakiki Publishing the honour and the opportunity to address Your Excellencies, ambassadors, high commissioners, councillors and other government representatives seated here today. Hakiki Publishing is an imprint of Hakiki Media Limited and is dedicated to putting into print and into the public domain the works of new and inspiring authors. Its first title is Free Your Mind, as we have here presented in front of us. The book was published in 2004. The challenge of Hakiki Publishing is to create a new desire to read, not any old book, but books that reflect and enhance life, and that will change forever the course of Africa and the mind of the African man, woman and child. I was delighted last year to meet with Councillor B.A. Usman of the Nigerian Embassy to the government of China, whilst on a visit to the Beijing International Book Fair, who, in his opinion, whilst reading the book, stated that Free Your Mind must be presented to the government of China as a standard textbook for every Chinese child to facilitate their knowledge and understanding of Africa's great contributions to the advancement of civilization globally. Likewise, Councillor Martin Makuru of the Zimbabwe Embassy in London, who attended our book launch last year and was the impetus for providing the contact for the AU delegates meeting in London, commended the book and is also desirous of seeing Free Your Mind as a standard textbook for every Zimbabwean child. When Mavis Chizonga, former MP of ZANU-PF, said at the International People's Assembly meeting held in London in 2003, she said much of the history of what took place during Zimbabwe's Chimurenga is not in any history book. She confirmed for Hakiki Publishing that the battle for the African mind is a struggle that Hakiki Publishing must be engaged in. Therefore, the principle upon which Hakiki Publishing is founded is liberating words, inspiring thoughts. It therefore gives me great honor to present to you the author of Free Your Mind, Andrew Mohammed, also known as the Investigator, whose book of organized and indisputable truth, we pray and hope, will resonate throughout the length and width of Africa, creating waves of joy for the information contained in the book. I present to you Andrew Mohammed.
Good afternoon, distinguished gentlemen, distinguished ladies. It's a great pleasure just to give you a very short 5 to 10 minute presentation on this book, and believe me, this is an honor for me to be in front of yourselves and for you to just give me 5 to 10 minutes of your time to show you why this book to me is very, very important for our people, especially for all people, but especially for the African mind. Now, myself, I'm actually born of Jamaican heritage, but I definitely see myself as an African born abroad. As you see on the slideshow, which I'm about to show you very briefly, my job is that I'm a teacher and an historian by trade. But I also go around all over the UK and into Africa teaching the beautiful history of our people. And to do that, I'll explain to you why I actually wrote this book and the language that I used in writing this book as well. Now, the concept I use when I go into schools and universities is learn to love to learn. That would make learning a culture that we actually enjoy and we fall in love with. Now, that was me at a very young age. Ooh, yeah. A few R's, please. But that was me at a very young age. Why I show that? Because, you see, born in this country, I had no knowledge of who I was. And being in that situation, I was very mediocre at school. I didn't excel in any of my classes. The reason being is that I was never focused in my studies. I was easily distracted and I had no concept or no goals in my life. And one of the main reasons for this is because the education in this country never showed me where I fit. Not just in this country, but in the global issue. For example, we took a picture of this room, beautiful room here today, and I showed you that picture in a week's time, a year's time. By nature, who would you first look for in that picture? By nature, it'd be yourself. Because if you want to first find out how do I fit in the picture, and from that point, you can see how everyone else fits in the picture. So, when I left school, I was very depressed, and I got a beautiful older brother, his name's Michael, and he gave me a book. I never read books outside of school, but this book was on African history, and this was new to me. I was not interested in reading, but when I read this book for the first time, it's like a light turned on inside of my head. And then I appreciate, my goodness, I'm coming from a very proud culture. I'm coming from a very proud continent. I'm coming from a very proud history that has never ever been given to me before in my life. And that turned a light on in my head, and I went back to college. This time, knowing a bit better who I was and who I represented, and I went through all of my exams in college. I've done diplomas and went on to university. I got straight distinctions, and that was the change that history of my African culture gave me that was missing today, not just in England, but even on the mother continent, in terms of the true history of what we have done as a people. So, in doing that, I've now been into the schools and working for different organisations, going through and giving not just African children and Afro-Caribbean children the history, but all children, because I believe that every essence of African history should be taught to all people, regardless of their creed, colour or class. And so, one or two things I actually touch on in the book, which really turned on that light inside of my mind, in my studies, I went older Mendel, an Austrian botanist, who wanted to discover the origin of man, and he looked into the genetics origin of man. And he found that man had two main genes, and the dominant gene, which was the black gene, was the original gene on this planet, and that from two black people you can get every colour under the sun. And that showed me that the origin of man came out of the African continent. And therefore my studies then went into anthropology, and I studied in what's called the Leakey family, which I think many of you are fully aware of this family. They're world famous for anthropology, and they studied into the origin of man too. And their studies didn't end up in Brighton, Liverpool, Manchester. Their studies took them into the African continent, into Tanzania, and from that eastern part they found that the origin of man had its existence. And so therefore they found in 1959, Mary Leakey found a fossil which she called Zinj anthropus. Zinj meaning black, anthropus meaning man. And she studied that this man had other four ancestors, four parents. And they studied further into that science, and they proved indisputably that Africa was the origin of the man, and they discovered that the woman, the African woman, was paramount to civilization worldwide. Now this may sound small to some people, but believe me, when you're in school and you don't hear nothing about other than 1066, William the Conqueror and what have you, you don't hear nothing about what we as a people have done, believe me, it turned in the light on my head, and it made me realise, you know what, if we've done this in history time, why can't we do this today? So I went on studies, and for the last 10 years I've been taking groups of people in the UK, mothers, fathers, children and schools. I've taken back to the African continent, starting off with Egypt, and I'm showing them that the original Egyptians were people that looked like me and you, basically. And that we went back and we studied into the origin of Osiris, and this is one of the oldest depictions of Osiris This is Men's, an African Men's who was the first pharaoh of ancient Egypt in the first dynasty, about 5,500 years ago. And then I looked into the various pharaohs of Egypt, and I found that they looked quite African in their makeup. And I was thinking, why are they not teaching this in our schools? Because this will give pride to who you are, that we're not ashamed of who we are. But believe me or not, born in this country, many of the youth that you see underachieving, not just Afro-Caribbean, but the African youth in this country, if they were availed to this type of knowledge, believe me, we can literally reproduce our true potential today. So that's one of the reasons why I've done the books, really just to give them an idea of who they are, and touch on the fact that these people that gave the world mathematics, science, religion, chemistry, all types of scientific branches of knowledge, were literally people who were of African origin. We went into the field of science and we looked at Imhotep, one of the world's first multi-genius, who was a scientist, a doctor, a poet, a farmer, an astronomer, a chemist, a mason, an architect. He literally was the father of medicine. And he built what we call today the Step Pyramid, which is one of the first pyramids built on this planet Earth in the city of Saqqara, just outside Cairo. But at one time it was covered in gold. I mean, this to me should be information that we should not just be given in the UK about our brothers and sisters in the motherland, because my colleague Leo Mohammed, who just came back from Zimbabwe and Gambia, when he's teaching this to the children in Gambia, they will say, we've never ever heard this before. And I'm thinking, my God, what is happening to our culture? We need to really revive this and show the world that we are absolutely world builders. So we looked at the things like the pyramids, which today impossible to be reproduced. One of the largest monuments on earth for over 5,000 years, and built and covered in gold with hieroglyphics. Who were the builders? Let's look at some of these builders. Pharaoh Khufu of the 4th dynasty. As you see there, this is a small model of him that I found in the Cairo Museum. There's hardly any attention paid to this statue of him, but yet he's the builder of what we call the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's phenomenal, but you can see by his features, he was an African. Pharaoh Khafre, who built the pyramid beside that, and Pharaoh Menkuri. And these are the facts I'm trying to highlight in the book, and I believe that it should really be taught all over the world. And as we look at various other pharaohs, in my 3 minutes of conclusion, this is Herodotus, which is required reading in Oxford and Cambridge, and he wrote a book called The Histories. And in book 2, when I read these books, see, I grew up not reading, but once I fell in love with knowledge, and I found these books that were in libraries, and he wrote about how proud the Greeks were of sitting at the feet of Africans and being their students. And I'm saying we talk all about the Greek civilization, but how many of us are now really reproducing this work and showing that the Greek civilization was based out of the fantastic minds of the African ancestors? And I think that, you know, this should really be a culture that we should now start a revolution, a mind revolution in this country, to really show that these people, the Greeks, who are great builders of civilization, they were proud, very proud to travel to places like Thebes, Luxor, Cairo, and learn from great African scholars and masters. And so, in my conclusion, I realized that the African civilization that was built wasn't just based in Africa, which is approximately 12 million square miles. The whole of the planet Earth, which is approximately 196,940,000 square miles, was covered with African glory. And in my conclusion, I then studied into India, and I realized that in India they had many ancient civilizations that were too African. And when I looked into the Buddhas, they all had African features, and I looked into the word Krishna. We all heard about Krishna, but the very word Krishna means he with an African face, he with a black face. That's the very word, the transliteration of the word Krishna, that's what it means. And when you go into the ancient depictions of Krishna, he was actually proud to be an African living in India. And then you study into what we call the Indus civilization, which was a great civilization. So I'm producing books with Hakiki Publishing to show us that we, believe it or not, need to revive this information so that the youth, the next generation that comes after us, can see that they are coming from a